Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second installment of Targum Torah. This week I'm going to be looking at Parsha Noach. And this is what we're reading this week. It is the story of Noah. And in both this week's Parsha and last week's Parsha, we see that there's a connecting theme, the danger, but also the potential that water represents. Last week we read in Shul about the unformed world and its state of tohu vavohu, which has lots of different ways that it's been interpreted and translated. I'm going to refer to it as primordial chaos, but there may be other ways that you feel are better. We learned that God was separating between the waters above and the waters below, the mayim lamayim. And the way in which he did this was through a rakia, a firmament. And for those who are familiar with modern Hebrew, reka, like a background, is kind of like in that context there too. In Noach, we see what happens when God breaks down the division to create the Mavel Mayim, the floodwaters. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at both the words that relate to water and some of the variations that happen within Targum Onkelos and also within the Septuagint. In Bereshit, chapter 1, verse 2, we've come across the word tahom. This was last week's Parsha. We read in the dictionary BDB that this word can be understood as deep, sea, or abyss, a word which is not the standard use for water, or really sea for that matter, which would be either mayim or yam. Targum Onkelos brings an Aramaic form of the exact same word, so tahoma, but in the Septuagint, it translated as simply water, like hydration, same root in Greek. The word tahom carries a weight to it that the Septuagint is missing in its translation here, in my opinion, by using a more generic word. The root of the word tahom is old, and it is also found in Akkadian, which was an ancient language spoken in Babylon both before and during the time of King David. In Akkadian, we read of the word timiati, which can be sea or lake, very similar to the word that we saw in BDB's entry for tahom in terms of how it's understood. Rashi states here that tahom is water on the surface of the earth. At least that's how I'm reading his comment. But I think that the Radak, another commentator at a different period, gives a fuller image of makom revuyim hamayim ve'emukim, or emakim, a place of abundant water and depths. Here, the description captures an image and weight that the word tahom, in my opinion, embodies. At the beginning of creation, we have a state of primordial chaos, that tohu vavohu, which in this darkness is inclusive of the tahom. And out of this chaos, God begins to create order. So that was last week's Parsha, and I want to try to connect it to this week's Parsha. For Noah, water is both a violent and chaotic force, but it is under God's control in this new order that has been created. In chapter 6, verse 17, God brings a flood, Mavel Mayim. Rashi reads with Onkelos as tufna, if I'm reading that correctly, since everything was destroyed, mixed up, and carried away. So we see that there's three roots here that Rashi brings, Beit Lamed Hey, Beit Lamed, which in modern Hebrew we still use to this day when we're all mixed up, and then Hovil, also used concurrently in the modern period to carry something away. Rashi adds that the flood swept away all of this destruction to Babylon. So this is kind of his bringing in what I'm assuming is Midrashic tradition, because over in Babylon it was such a deep place, Emuka. So here in the Noah story, we see that Rashi is pulling in that sense of depth that when his comment on Bereshit I didn't quite see. The word used by the Septuagint here is katalusmon hudror, or hudor, depending on how your Greek pronunciation is, which is probably better than mine, which reads as a water flood or deluge. When the waters of the deep are opened by God in chapter 7, verse 11, we return to the word tahom in the Hebrew, which here the Septuagint does a better job and translates as tes abusoi, as of the deep or abyss. So where the Septuagint kind of missed the mark, in my opinion, in the first Parsha that we looked at, here in this week's Parsha, it captures that. And in fact, the Greek looks to be the same root from which we take in English, abyss. The primordial image of tahom and the feeling that the rain from above and the springs from below can be uncontrollable and unpredictable forces is really not so hard for us to imagine today. We often see this throughout the course of the year. We see that actuary tables of insurance are increasing in terms of natural weather events and becoming, for those who own homes and are paying insurance rates, have probably been seeing in the United States in particular, insurance rates go up because of this unpredictability that is coming into our current world. it is very much a part of our human experience. Sometimes a translation can capture the subtle meaning and connect with the reader. Other times a translation can miss it or be inconsistent. And that's really what I wanted to kind of unpack here a little bit today, was both capturing the sort of human element of the word to home, how that can really connect to someone in some ways, like when an ancient reader was reading it. In my imagining, I can see them really having like a reaction to that word that at first the Septuagint kind of appears to miss. But you see that the commentators at later periods pick up on that, and at another point in time, the Septuagint does capture that meaning a little bit more. So thank you for joining me this week. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on how these could be organized, please feel free to reach out to me through my website, which is linked in the comments. And I look forward to sharing with you, God willing, again next week. Thank you.